April 12th, 2024. Charleston smelled like salt and jasmine that night. The kind of evening you think will be remembered for its warmth. Ours was meant to be. 30 years of marriage, one long table soft jazz, drifting under the ceiling fans of high cotton. I remember the clinking of glasses, the polite laughter, the way candlelight softened even the hardest faces, until my sister decided to harden mine. Denise raised her glass toward me, her lipstick leaving a half moon on the rim. "We took your savings, Viv. You'll understand someday." Her words were silk, smooth, practiced, almost rehearsed. The table went quiet, but not in shock. It was the kind of silence that follows a joke only some are in on. Harold froze fork halfway to his mouth. The man beside him laughed nervously, then stopped when no one followed. My hand stayed on my napkin. I remember pressing my thumb into the fabric until I felt bone. "You'll understand someday." She said it with that small upward curl, the same one she used when we were 12, and she blamed me for breaking Mother's vase. That smirk had always been her signature, a soft weapon. I looked at her and smiled back. Maybe I already do. My voice was calm, too calm, the kind that made people glance away. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. Every cell in my body felt the air change. The warmth from the candles seemed to fade. Somewhere, a waiter dropped a fork, and the sound sliced through the room like punctuation. My sister laughed again, pretending the moment hadn't just shifted gravity. "Oh, come on, Viv. It's just family. You're too serious, always have been." The others joined, grateful for the escape. They laughed like it wasn't theft dressed as a toast. I sat back, feeling the champagne slide down my throat, cold and dry. The music picked up again. I watched her across the table. Her gold bracelet caught the light. The one from Mother. The one she swore she had lost years ago. For a moment, everything around me blurred. It wasn't anger that came first. It was clarity. That same clarity I used to read numbers, to trace patterns in the ledgers of people's lives. You don't need to shout to see the truth. You just need to listen long enough. Denise kept talking, filling the air with small talk and self-congratulations, as if her confession had already dissolved into the evening. I nodded in all the right places, smiled when expected, the dutiful older sister. But inside, a quiet ledger had opened. Every word she spoke went on one side, every pause of mine on the other. When dessert came, I excused myself to the restroom. In the mirror, I didn't see humiliation. I saw a woman calculating. My reflection was steady, not broken. The world outside that door could think what it wanted. The real story had just begun. When I returned, Denise was showing photos on her phone, talking about her beach house in Folly. I sat down, folded my napkin, and set my phone on the table. Its screen faced upward voice recorder open. She didn't notice. "So generous of you, Viv," she said with that fake warmth again. "You always know how to make things easier for the family." "Yes," I said softly. "Easier." The word felt like steel in my mouth. The evening moved on in fragments, a laugh here, a toast there. But beneath it all, something irreversible had shifted. People often imagine betrayal as fire, loud, burning, destructive. They're wrong. It's quieter than that. It seeps in like cold air through an old window. You don't notice until your bones ache. When the check came, Harold reached for it. Denise leaned over, placing her hand on his arm. "Oh, don't worry, we'll cover it. After all, we've been using Viv's generosity for months." Her husband chuckled. My husband froze again. I smiled because there was nothing else to do. Every laugh around me felt rehearsed, like a scene I hadn't auditioned for. I stood, lifted my glass, and said only this: to understanding. They raised theirs, relieved that the mood had survived. None of them realized that something else had just ended. Later that night, when Harold and I drove home, he broke the silence first. "Do you want to talk about it?" I looked out at the streetlights, each one flickering past like a metronome marking the end of a song. "Not yet," I said. "Numbers don't lie. I just need to check the math." He nodded his hand, tightening briefly on the wheel. The night stretched ahead of us long and clean. I knew the work would begin in the morning. Betrayal wasn't new to me. I had built a career recognizing it in the fine print. This time, it was written in my sister's smile, and I had already started keeping score. April 4th, 2024. The envelope from First Federal Bank arrived just after sunrise, slipped through the brass slot, and resting on the woven rug like a quiet verdict. I made coffee the kind Harold says tastes like a decision, and opened the letter at the kitchen island while the oak trees outside shifted in the wind. Transfer. Complete the header said, $112,000. From the family account used for Mother, the one I kept open, only to tidy loose ends. Recipient of record Denise Carter Wells. My eyes did not blur. They narrowed. I set the letter flat, aligned its corners with the grain of the wood, and reached for the blue pen that has lived in our cutlery drawer for a decade. Numbers do not lie. They may whisper. They may hide under friendly words. They do not lie. I listed dates. I listed transfer codes. I wrote the last 4 digits of the account and the routing number, and the note that read estate support as if grief required a number line. Harold walked in, tying his tie, his voice gentle. You could confront her. You could call right now. I looked up and saw his face in the window reflected by the morning light, the same face that has stood beside me through layoffs and storms. I could, I said, but you do not confront termites. You remove the wood. He winced at that, then half smiled the way he does when he knows I am already past the question. I took out the binder where I have kept every record from the last 2 years, plastic sleeves that hold receipts, emails, the slow archaeology of a family. I added the letter to the front, dated the page, and breathed. The coffee cooled. The neighborhood woke. Somewhere a dog barked. In the binder lay my own history of believing that kindness could outlast appetite. I thought of the day I opened that account for Mother, a practical step made in a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and oranges. Denise had cried then, soft and persuasive. She said she would help. I believed her because belief is easier than suspicion when your parent is sleeping in a room full of machines. I once taught clients how to detect fraud. I never thought I would see my own name on the victim line. I placed my palm on the countertop until I felt steadiness return. Then I opened my laptop and signed into online banking. The ledger populated itself with a calm I admired. Date, time, amount, memo. There was a series of small transfers like test taps on a door, then 2 large ones spaced 10 days apart, the second moving almost the remainder. The destination carried the initials DCW. Denise had not even created distance. Whoever told her that family names protect you did not teach her about archives. I printed the statement and highlighted each line in blue, the color of ocean and boundary. Harold set a plate of toast beside me and did not speak. He has learned that my silence is a tool, not a wound. I wrote a question at the top of the page. Why now? I wrote a second. What story will she tell? Denise did not steal. She borrowed without returning her favorite hobby. I could hear her voice in my head, even then soft as bakery sugar. You know, I needed it. You understand. Mother would have wanted comfort. The word comfort has done more damage in my family than poverty ever did. Comfort became excuse. Excuse became policy. Policy became tradition. And tradition is the most elegant costume theft can wear. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The marsh grass along the creek was turning spring green. A heron lifted and settled beyond the dock. The world kept its balance. Mine would too. I called the bank and asked the woman on the line to read the note attached to the transfer. Estate support, she said. I asked if the estate was still open in their system. It is not, she said. It closed last summer. I thanked her, recorded the time of the call, and wrote her first name in the margin. Then I called my son Michael and asked if he and Laura could come by for supper. Just us. Nothing heavy, bring the baby. He heard something in my tone that told him what I did not say. He said they would come. I returned to the binder. Under a tab labeled Household, I kept a small stack of notes to myself. Phrases I use when emotion kicks the door of reason. Write before you speak. Pause before you decide. Choose actions that create peace. Some thefts come with perfume. I could smell Denise even in this quiet room. Gardenia and a little smoke. She always smelled like a party that ended late. I put the notes back and pulled out the last letter Mother wrote to us both, neat script on cream paper. Vivian will ensure Denise is comfortable. 10 words that became a leash. I read them once and put the letter away. Then I opened my email and searched for any message from Denise in the last 6 months that hinted at money. There were 4. The subject lines were almost cheerful. Update on Mom. Taxes and loose ends. Quick question about fees. Can we meet? I printed them, circled a few phrases, and began a timeline. April 4th letter arrives. Prior transfers identified. Call with bank logged. Family notified for supper. The work of a morning, and already the story looked less like shock and more like arithmetic. Harold returned without the tie. He set it down like a surrendered flag and sat opposite me. He reached across palm up and waited. I placed my hand in his. We stayed like that for a long minute. Then he said again softly, "You could confront her." I shook my head. Not yet. Confrontation feeds performance, and she loves an audience. Accountability prefers a room with good light and a table. He nodded. He knows my rooms. He knows my tables. By noon, I had a clean copy of every transfer and a small list of questions. Why did she keep the recipient field so obvious? Who coached her? What does she plan to say when the first person asks why? I ate half the toast. I folded the letter from the bank and slid it into a fresh sleeve. It holds. There is a reason I never trusted nostalgia. It edits too kindly. The Charleston I remember was not the one in postcards. Ours was small houses pressed together, the scent of boiled peanuts in summer, the hum of ceiling fans that tried and failed to cool our tempers. Denise and I grew up in a house where love was a transaction, and I was always the creditor. Mother Margaret Carter ruled from her armchair with a teacup and opinions sharper than glass. She called Denise delicate, as if that word excused everything that followed. She called me reliable, as if that was praise instead of duty. I was 12 when I learned that in our family, tears bought time. Denise could cry at the sound of consequence. Mother would fold. Father tried to mediate but died too soon, leaving behind an unfinished porch and 2 daughters who learned opposite arts. Denise mastered charm. I mastered arithmetic. Our mother did not divide love equally. She divided guilt. By high school, Denise had discovered that beauty could erase error. She dated older boys with cars and never paid for gas. I worked weekends at a diner on Broad Street, saving for textbooks, tipping more than I earned, because fairness was my small rebellion. I remember one night in 1979 when she came home past midnight perfume and laughter preceding her. Mother was waiting, arms crossed. Denise wept before a word was spoken. Within minutes, Mother was making cocoa, and I was the one sent to bed for worrying. Denise learned early that tears buy time. Years rolled the way habits do. I left for the University of South Carolina with a single suitcase and a check that bounced the first week. Denise stayed home, moved from job to job, each ending with a story that began with bad luck and ended with her being misunderstood. I mailed home small checks when I could. Mother wrote back saying Denise needed them more. I stopped expecting equity. After graduation, I took a job at Palmetto Savings. Numbers steadied me. People lie, but patterns do not. When you balance accounts for long enough, you begin to see human nature in spreadsheets. Denise visited sometimes, arriving unannounced, wearing borrowed confidence. She always left with something that belonged to me. A sweater, a book, once my silver watch. She would say she found it later, and I would thank her for returning what she had taken. Gratitude became my disguise. In 1991, I married Harold Quietkind, the kind of man who listens to the space between words. Denise danced at our wedding barefoot because her shoes hurt, and Mother said she looked free. I noticed she never returned the pearl earrings I lent her. By the late 90s, I was managing small portfolios teaching clients about compound interest. Denise was on her second divorce, explaining to anyone who would listen that love just wasn't fair to her. Mother repeated the line as if it were gospel. I sent gift cards at Christmas, guilt disguised as generosity. Mother aged. Denise stayed the same, her crises seasonal. When Mother's health began to fail, I handled the bills. Denise handled sympathy. She sat by the bed, reading devotionals aloud, then slipped the cash from the envelopes that visitors brought. I caught her once and said nothing. Silence was my inheritance. When Mother died in 2017, the lawyer called us to the office on Meeting Street. The air smelled of lemon polish and finality. The will was short. After the usual legal phrasing came one sentence that rewrote my next decade. Vivian will ensure Denise's comfort. 10 words. No commas, no mercy. Denise squeezed my hand and whispered that Mother always knew who to trust. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tear the paper. Instead, I nodded because it was expected. Denise got the antique jewelry box, the one lined with velvet. I got everything inside it that was empty. For years afterward, she treated that sentence as license. Bills appeared in my mailbox. Phone calls arrived just before dinner. Viv, could you help just until next month? You know Mother would want this. I would send checks small enough to feel manageable, large enough to confirm her script. I kept the receipts in a folder labeled Family Obligations, as if naming the wound could control its bleeding. When Harold and I bought our house on East Bay Street, Denise started bringing friends to show it off, calling it our place. She would lean against the railing, tell stories about how she helped us paint the shutters. She hadn't lifted a brush. The neighbors smiled politely. I learned to endure the performance. Reliability is invisible until it breaks. By 2020, Harold retired from teaching, and I stepped down from consulting. We traveled a little, but every return brought some new crisis from Denise. A flat tire, a medical bill, a lost deposit. I wired money, watched it vanish, told myself peace was worth the price. I believed that until April 4th, 2024, when the letter came. Looking back now, I see how the pattern compounded. Every favor accrued interest. Every silence matured into permission. History collects interest, and I had been paying it for 50 years. I think of the day we cleared Mother's house. Denise kept the photographs, the ones where she looked luminous. She left behind the receipts and the insurance forms, which I boxed neatly. That afternoon, she stood in the doorway holding a vase wrapped in newspaper. "Do you want this?" she asked. I told her no. She smiled. Then I watched her walk down the steps and place it in her trunk without bubble wrap, the sound of glass shifting inside. That was our childhood in a single moment. Her carelessness, my restraint. People say family shapes you. Ours shaped me into a ledger, debit and credit, action and consequence. Denise once told me that I think too much about fairness. I told her that fairness is not thought, it is habit. She laughed and said, "Maybe that is why you are always tired." I was. But fatigue builds precision. It makes you see small things like the way her handwriting slanted, right when she lied, the way she blinked before saying, "Thank you." When she said at the dinner, "You'll understand someday," I heard the echo of every time Mother excused her. The script was old. The actors were grayer, but the play had not changed. Only the audience had grown less forgiving. Our mother's house was sold long ago, yet Denise still called it ours like a ghost needing a dress. Sometimes she would drive by and send me pictures captioned with memories she had invented. The last one came a month before the dinner. The text said, "Miss those mornings when you made coffee for Mom and me." I replied with a single word. Indeed. She did not catch the distance. Looking back through those years, I no longer see sisterhood. I see a long con sustained by sentiment. And yet I remember small things that confuse the narrative. How she braided my hair the morning of my wedding. How she cried when Harold's father died. She is not pure villain. I am not pure victim. But patterns do not change without correction, and correction sometimes wears the face of revenge. I poured myself a drink and reread Mother's will that night. Vivian will ensure Denise's comfort. The lawyer had smiled when reading it as if it were noble. He did not know that comfort unchecked becomes corrosion. I folded the paper back into its envelope and whispered to the air mother, I have insured it long enough. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one, like witnesses taking seats. Somewhere, Denise was probably calling someone else for sympathy. I poured another half-inch of bourbon and smiled for the first time that day. The math was about to change. I kept the books. She kept the excuses. The call came at 9:12 a.m., the time when the morning light in Charleston turned sharp and honest. I was rinsing blueberries in a glass bowl when the phone rang, the old landline that only family still uses. I let it ring twice before picking up. Denise's voice spilled through the receiver syrup, sweet enough to coat poison. "See you tonight, Viv." She said the words stretched like ribbon, thin and deliberate. I could hear the faint clink of her bracelets, the same ones she always wore when she needed something. Her voice held that brightness people mistake for charm, but I knew it as the warning tone, before a request. "You sound well," I said. She laughed softly. "Well enough." "Harold says hi," I added. She ignored that part as if names were inconvenient. "Just wanted to make sure you're coming tonight. Everyone's expecting you. Everyone." The word landed like a card turned face up. She wanted audience. She always did. I imagined her standing by her kitchen window, coffee untouched, rehearsing lines. She never called before taking, only after. There was a pause, that strange pause when neither side believes the conversation is casual. I said I wouldn't miss it. Her relief was audible like the sound of air escaping a balloon. "You're bringing that bracelet right, Mothers." "It's perfect with that blue dress." I looked toward the wooden jewelry box on my dresser, the one thing I had kept from Mother's house. The bracelet sat inside silver and heavy, engraved with Margaret's initials and a small cross. I hadn't worn it in years. I said I might. She said, "Good, it'll remind everyone what family means." Then she hung up without goodbye. I stood there holding the receiver against the silence until the dial tone returned, flat and final. I packed the bracelet like a peace offering or evidence. It glinted in the morning light, a small inheritance turned weapon. The rest of the day passed in quiet rituals. I ironed Harold's shirt. I polished my shoes. I checked the reservation email for the restaurant. High cotton corner table by the window anniversary dinner at 7. The irony was not lost on me. 30 years of marriage and the guest list included the sister who had withdrawn my savings. Harold read the paper while I moved through the rooms, his eyes occasionally lifting to study me. "You don't have to go," he said. I folded the napkins. "I do. She expects me to." He sighed a low sound that carried decades of shared restraint. "Do you want me to stay quiet?" I smiled. "Always." By noon, the air outside had thickened. The azaleas along the fence drooped from humidity. I walked to the study and took out the small recorder I use for consulting notes. It still worked. I tested it, said the date aloud, then deleted the file. Habit is its own armor. I slipped it into my clutch beside a pen and the folded letter from the bank. Denise would call it over-prepared. I called it consistent. Around 3, I sat at the kitchen table, the bracelet resting before me on a cloth napkin. It had once belonged to a woman who believed appearance was morality. Mother wore it at church, at dinner parties, at funerals. It was her badge of composure. I turned it over, tracing the engraving with my thumb feeling the dent where it had once been dropped. When she gave it to me, she said, "Keep it, Vivian. You'll understand its meaning someday." I almost laughed, remembering that. Maybe Denise had inherited more than the perfume. She had inherited the lines, too. I placed the bracelet into the small velvet pouch, tied it with a string, and set it in my bag. The sky began to darken earlier than expected, a gray wash over the harbor. The weatherman said rain might come by nightfall. I watched the water and thought of the years between our childhood and now of all the dinners where I had bitten my tongue. You could confront her, Harold had said last week. Maybe tonight was confrontation not by volume but by exposure. Denise loved performance. I could give her a stage. Around 5, Harold knocked on the doorframe holding 2 envelopes, anniversary cards from Michael and Laura. Inside one, a photo of the baby in a sun hat. Inside the other, a handwritten note. "Proud of you both. Love that lasts inspires us." I folded the note, slipped it into my wallet. Then I looked at Harold and said, "Do you remember the night we met?" He smiled. "You corrected the bartender's math, and you married me anyway. Because accuracy is attractive," he said. I laughed. Then he saw the look on my face and grew serious. "Be careful tonight." "I will," I said, "but not too careful." At 6:30, we dressed. I wore the navy dress Denise mentioned, the one she had once borrowed, and returned with a stain I never pointed out. Harold helped me clasp the bracelet around my wrist. His hands lingered steady and warm. "You're sure?" he asked. "Absolutely." The restaurant lights would be soft, the music lived the perfect backdrop for civility. Denise would count on that. She thrived where witnesses blurred. I wanted her to feel the walls of politeness close in, to realize control can be turned quietly. Before leaving, I placed the printed bank statement in my coat pocket. It felt heavier than paper. We drove in silence past the old Carter house, now painted white with new owners. For a moment, I thought I saw the outline of our childhood in its windows, 2 girls leaning on opposite sides of the same frame. Then the light changed, and it was gone. As we neared downtown, I looked out at the harbor again. The tide was low, the mudflats visible, raw, and honest. Truth always comes out when the water recedes. At a red light, Harold reached for my hand. "You don't have to explain yourself to her," he said. I know I answered. That's what will confuse her most. By the time we parked, the sky had turned a faint violet and the first drops of rain touched the windshield. Denise's car was already there, silver as ever parked, just crooked enough to be noticed. She never changed. I stepped out, adjusted the clasp on my bracelet, and looked at the reflection of the restaurant doors. The woman staring back at me did not look angry. She looked resolved. Inside, I could hear the laughter of early diners, the clatter of plates, the faint hum of a saxophone warming up. A celebration waited. So did an ending. I whispered to myself, "Tonight the math will balance." Then I walked inside. The restaurant shimmered under gold light, the kind that flatters everyone and hides intention. By 7:45, the private dining room was half filled with laughter that had rehearsed itself. High cotton always managed to make Charleston feel smaller, like everyone inside was part of the same gentle play. Denise sat opposite me, her dress the color of champagne sequins, catching every flicker from the candles. She had chosen the seat deliberately near the head of the table, where she could command attention without appearing to. Harold was beside me, quiet as always, his hand resting near mine. The waiter poured another round, the bubbles rising like nervous applause. I could already sense the rhythm of her plan, the pause before her entrance line. She leaned back, eyes glinting with the self-assurance of someone who mistakes charm for intelligence. I smiled because smiling was my shield. Across from us, the couples murmured small talk about anniversaries and the best seafood on the coast. The band in the corner shifted from jazz to something slower, saxophone, weaving through the air like smoke. Denise lifted her glass, the movement. Graceful, deliberate, a cue. Her perfume reached me before her words. "We took your savings, Viv. You'll understand someday." The sentence was light, playful to untrained ears. The table chuckled. Someone said, "Oh, my Denise." Someone else added, "Families share everything, don't they?" The sound of glasses clinking followed, polite, oblivious, but my ears found only the fracture in the air, the small, sharp crack that meant something precious had split. Humiliation served medium rare. My smile held calm and exact. Denise's smirk widened, pleased with herself, mistaking my silence for surrender. Her husband Roger nodded in weak complicity, the kind of man who laughs when he should leave. Harold froze mid-sip, his eyes finding mine across the candle. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. The toast wasn't to love, it was to control. Denise set her glass down with a flourish, satisfied. The sequins on her sleeve caught the light like applause. She turned to the guests beside her, whispering something that made them laugh again, shallow and complicit. I heard my name followed by a word like generous. Every giggle was a signature on her downfall. I lifted my glass slowly, the bubbles trembling near the rim. "Maybe I already do," I said softly. The table quieted just enough to hear me. Denise blinked, uncertain whether I was joking. I looked at her straight and unblinking, then reached into my clutch and placed my phone on the table. Its small red light blinked once before disappearing. A simple recorder, nothing more. The gesture was enough to shift the air. Denise frowned, eyes flicking to it. I smiled again, wider this time. "Don't worry, I'll understand soon enough." The waiter appeared, offering refills that no one accepted. The music continued slower, lower, as if the saxophonist had sensed the drop in temperature. Harold cleared his throat, broke the silence with a question about dessert, a mercy. The others followed his lead, pretending to move on, but the rhythm of conversation was gone. It had been replaced by the slow hum of unease. Denise turned her attention to her drink fingers, tracing the condensation. She was rehearsing a new narrative already. Across the table, I could see Pastor Cole and his wife from the church committee, whispering their expressions politely tight. Words travel faster than sound in Charleston. I let the moment stretch. No raised voices, no accusations, just the stillness of realization beginning to take shape around her. My hand brushed the bracelet on my wrist, the silver cool against my skin. Mother would have called this unladylike. I called it justice taking its seat. The waiter placed the cake in front of us, the white frosting gleaming like surrender. Harold lit the candles, 30 small flames, marking 3 decades of endurance. The guests applauded. Denise joined in her claps a touch too sharp. She leaned forward and said, "To 30 years of love, patience, and shared everything." I met her gaze. "Shared, yes," I said. "Patience, most of all." The laughter that followed was forced. Roger raised his glass again, as if applause could smother tension. The night continued, but the texture had changed. Conversations slipped, voices lowered forks, clinked against plates without rhythm. Every few minutes someone glanced toward me, then at Denise, trying to decode the silence between us. Harold leaned close and murmured, "Are you all right?" "Perfectly." My voice came steady, almost gentle. He nodded. The band moved into a slow tune, a melody from the 80s that once played at our wedding. Denise noticed and smiled knowingly, thinking sentiment would soften me. It did not. I stood and adjusted my bracelet, its clasp glinting under the chandelier. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my tone warm, host-like. "We are grateful for your company tonight." The table responded with murmurs and smiles. Denise clapped lightly, relieved to see me returning to the script. She believed she had survived the awkwardness. But in my mind, I was already cataloging faces, witnesses, and timings. I noted how Mrs. Harris looked away, how Pastor Cole's jaw tightened, how Roger's eyes darted when Denise spoke. Evidence builds itself when you stay quiet long enough. The waiter brought the check and Harold reached for it. I stopped him with a touch. "Allow me," I said. Denise laughed too loud. "Oh, come on, Viv, after all you've been so generous already." The table went still again, smiles frozen mid-sympathy. My hand did not tremble as I signed the bill. Generosity is a habit, I said. Some of us can afford to keep it. Denise flushed, then tried to recover with a smile, but her voice faltered. "Well, you always did know how to make a point." I placed the pen down carefully. "Only when it matters." Outside, rain began tapping against the windows, faint but steady. The sound filled the silence better than words. I slipped the recorder back into my clutch, its memory holding every word she had spoken. The band's last note lingered low and resigned. Harold stood, offered his arm. I took it. Denise rose too, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "Thanks for coming," she said, that brittle cheer returning. I looked at her once more, studying the way the light caught her sequins, the way her confidence wavered just slightly now. "Thank you for the toast," I said. "It was illuminating." We stepped into the hallway, the scent of wine and rain mixing in the air. Behind us, the laughter resumed, thinner this time. We walked out into the drizzle, the kind that feels like static, fine and relentless. Harold opened the umbrella. I said, "Leave it." The rain felt earned. By the time we reached the car, my dress clung to my arms, the bracelet cold against my wrist. Harold asked, "Do you want me to drive?" I shook my head. "No. I want to think." As the city lights blurred across the windshield, I felt the humiliation settle into something cleaner, sharper, purposeful. She had turned my savings into her punchline, but she did not know the cost of a public stage. Tomorrow the story would begin to spread. Not because I told it, but because Charleston loves its whispers. Denise wanted to be the star of the evening. She was, only not in the way she imagined. The house was still when we returned, the kind of quiet that waits to see what you will do next. Harold went upstairs first, loosening his tie, saying something soft about making tea. I nodded but did not follow. I stayed in the living room where the lamplight was low and the air still smelled faintly of rain and perfume. My clutch lay on the table, the small red recorder resting inside. I took it out and pressed play. The sound began with laughter, the dull clink of glasses, then Denise's voice floating above the noise, bright and certain. "We took your savings, Viv. You'll understand someday." The laughter that followed sounded different, now thinner like glass cracking underwater. I let it play once then, again, listening not for pain but for rhythm. Revenge does not need rage, it needs records. I turned the volume down and watched the lights from the street drift across the wall, pale and steady. My reflection in the window looked calm enough to be someone else. Upstairs, I heard the faint creak of the bedroom door closing, Harold's footsteps fading. I knew he would not sleep easily, but he trusted me to know what came next. I sat with the sound of Denise's voice looping quietly through the room until it no longer hurt. It became data evidence, an entry on a ledger I had been keeping for half a lifetime. I picked up the blue pen from the side table, the same one I used for banking notes, and drew a line down the middle of a blank sheet of paper. On one side, I wrote Step 1, silence. On the other, I wrote Result clarity. Then I added a second line, Step 2, light. I did not yet know what that would mean, but I knew it was coming. Sometimes peace begins with a list. I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered the exact look on Denise's face after her toast, the way the color had drained beneath her foundation, how she tried to turn the moment into a joke and found no audience willing to laugh. That was the first crack. Humiliation is loud in public but quiet when it settles. I stood and walked into the kitchen. The clock above the stove showed 11:47. The refrigerator hummed steadily. I poured water into a glass and stared out through the back window at the garden, the azaleas dark and wet. Somewhere across town, Denise would be home by now, replaying the evening for herself, trying to rewrite what happened already, calling it a misunderstanding. She would believe time would blur it, that I would cool off, that she could fix it with brunch and laughter. She had always believed in reset buttons. I believed in records. I went to my desk and opened the old binder, added a new tab labeled April 12th, and slid the printed bank statement behind it. Then I slipped the recorder into the same sleeve-sealing sound and number together. Justice does not need an audience, just a plan. I opened my laptop and sent a short email to myself with the subject, Dinner Recording Backup, attaching the audio file. Then I wrote one line in the message body, Keep everything neat. I pressed send and felt something unclench inside me. Organization is oxygen when chaos tries to enter. I leaned back and let the quiet stretch. My anger had no heat left in it, only structure. I could see how the next weeks would move slow and deliberate, one step at a time. I did not need to raise my voice. Denise had given me her own confession in surround sound. I went upstairs, checked on Harold. He was asleep on his side, his hand resting near the edge of the bed, as if reaching for calm. I sat beside him for a moment, brushed my fingers across his knuckles. You don't have to worry, I whispered. The numbers will balance. Then I went to my desk by the window, the one that looked over the street where the lamplight turned the pavement gold. I took another page and began listing what I knew. April 4th transfer, April 12th public statement, witnesses 12, audio proof 1, pattern repeated, motive entitlement, outcome pending. I underlined the last word twice. The sound of rain had faded to a soft drip from the gutters. The air smelled of magnolia and something new like distance. I thought of the bracelet still around my wrist and unclasped it carefully, setting it down on the desk. It left a faint mark on my skin, pale and precise. I traced it with my thumb and smiled. Mother's comfort finally weighed nothing. I placed the bracelet into a small box, closed the lid, and slid it into the drawer. Then I looked at the paper again at the calm order of my handwriting. I wrote at the bottom, goal peace through exposure. Not revenge, not punishment, just the removal of illusion. I folded the paper, once slid it into the binder, and turned off the lamp. The room fell into half light, only the faint street lamp glow against the ceiling. I stood there for a moment, feeling the quiet settle around me. Somewhere a car passed, tires hissing on wet asphalt. I felt neither grief nor satisfaction, only a deep steadiness that had been missing for years. When Denise spoke tonight, she believed she was the one in control, but control without awareness is just noise. I picked up the glass of water, drank it down, and whispered to no one, Step 1, complete. Upstairs, Harold stirred and murmured something in his sleep. I went to the window again, opened it slightly. The night air moved through the curtains, cool and carrying the smell of rain-soaked wood. I let it fill the room. Then I whispered a line that surprised me, quiet enough that only the night could hear. Sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's scaffolding. I closed the window, left the binder on the desk, and turned off the light. The house exhaled with me one steady breath into darkness. Monday morning arrived bright and deceptive, the kind of Charleston morning that made even betrayal look civilized. By 9:30, I was seated in the church fellowship hall, a space that smelled of lemon polish and weak coffee, surrounded by women whose voices carried both gossip and grace. The Women's Outreach Committee met every third Monday to discuss donations and volunteer projects, but today the air felt different, a little tighter, as if the walls already knew something had shifted. Pastor Cole stood at the head of the table, his hands folded, speaking about stewardship and gratitude. Beside him sat Mrs. Harris, the treasurer, taking neat notes with her green pen. Across from me, Denise smiled like nothing had happened, her laugh bright and perfectly measured. I watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and nod as if listening deeply. It was almost art, her ability to look innocent under fluorescent light. When the discussion turned to the upcoming charity auction, Mrs. Harris mentioned a missing check from last month's donations, a small sum about $400 unaccounted for. The room grew quiet for a beat. Denise was the first to speak. I'm sure it's a clerical error, she said, her tone sweet and calm. Happens all the time. I could almost admire her. She moved through deceit the way others move through hymns. I waited until the next pause, then lifted my coffee cup. It's funny, I said softly, how some donations never reach their destination. The line landed like a dropped pin. A few heads turned. Mrs. Harris blinked. Pastor Cole cleared his throat. Denise's smile faltered just long enough for me to see the fear flash beneath the powder. I set my cup down gently and changed the subject, asking about the floral arrangements for the upcoming luncheon. The meeting continued, polite, measured, but the whisper had already started to move. I didn't post anything online. I just let Charleston whisper. Small towns don't need newspapers. They have brunch. After the meeting ended, I approached Pastor Cole by the door. His kind face was lined with confusion. "Everything all right, Vivian?" he asked. "Perfectly," I said, though. "There's something you should hear." I took my phone from my purse and played the recording volume low, but clear enough for the words to fall into the air between us. "We took your savings, Viv. You'll understand someday." Pastor Cole's eyes widened, then narrowed. He said nothing for a long moment, only exhaled. "I'd appreciate it if you kept this confidential," I added. just between stewards of the same community. He nodded slowly. Of course. But his expression told me the wheels of responsibility were already turning. Before I left, I sent the same file to Mrs. Harris, the woman who handled the church funds with surgical precision. Her reply came within minutes. "Thank you for trusting me, Vivian. I'll handle it discreetly." By noon, the audio had traveled to at least 3 inboxes and twice as many conversations. Denise's smirk began to fade, one whisper at a time. By the next morning, she was called into a meeting about the missing check. By Wednesday, she was quietly removed from her position as treasurer. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, it was because the pastor's wife couldn't finish her grocery run without hearing her name. Her friends stopped calling. At brunch the following Saturday, her usual table at the Magnolia Cafe was occupied by Linda and 2 others who didn't look up when she entered. Denise lingered at the door too long, pretending to scroll her phone, then left without ordering. I heard about it from Linda later that day, her tone tinged with pity. "Poor thing looked lost," she said. I nodded, then asked for another refill of tea. When people fall, they often do it slowly enough to narrate. Watching her unravel was like watching lace burn, silent but mesmerizing. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with a smile? Tell me if you have. The city moved on quickly, as it always does, but reputations in Charleston never vanish. They simply change rooms. By the following week, Denise had become an anecdote, a cautionary tale whispered between errands. She tried to reach me once calling from an unknown number, but I let it ring until voicemail. Her message was short. "I know what you did." I deleted it without listening twice. The truth did not need rehearsal. At church the next Sunday, she sat 2 pews behind me. I felt her presence like static. During the final hymn, she approached. Her perfume arrived before her words. "Viv, can we talk?" she whispered. I turned, looked her directly in the eyes, and said, "Not here. Not ever." Then I walked out into the sunlight. Outside, Mrs. Harris was waiting near the steps. She didn't ask questions. She only handed me an envelope. Inside was a short note. "The missing funds have been recovered. Thank you for your integrity." It felt like balance, the invisible kind. I folded the note, slipped it into my binder under step 2 light, and drove home with the windows down. The air smelled of salt and magnolia. I thought about Denise, about how her laughter had sounded at the dinner, how it now echoed in small retellings across the city. She would say, "I ruined her." But ruin requires innocence. She had run out of that long before I pressed record. Harold listened quietly that evening as I told him what happened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said only, "It's done then." For now, I answered. He raised his glass. "To peace," he said. To quiet consequences, I replied. That night, as I sat at my desk, I wrote another line in my ledger. Step 2. Complete. Result exposure without noise. Justice doesn't need announcement. It just needs circulation. I closed the binder and looked out the window. Across the street, the porch lights flickered on one by one, each small circle of brightness, holding its own silence. Somewhere in that glow, someone was already repeating what happened at the meeting. Denise would wake tomorrow to fewer friends, colder stares, polite avoidance that cuts deeper than confrontation. Charleston justice always comes with lace and tea. Her smirk had been currency. Now it was debt. By Friday, the air had turned warmer, the kind of April heat that makes Charleston porches shimmer and tempers shorten. I woke early, poured coffee, and called the locksmith. His name was Calvin, a man I had hired once before after Harold misplaced his office keys. He arrived within the hour carrying a small silver case that clicked open like a doctor's bag. I showed him the doors, the front and back, the side gate, and the storage shed. He didn't ask why I needed them changed. People who work with locks rarely ask about stories. By noon, the old brass keys lay in a neat pile on the kitchen counter, their teeth dulled with age. Calvin held up the new set, shiny, precise. "All replaced," he said. "You're secure now." I paid in cash and watched his truck disappear down the street. The silence afterward was pure. Locks don't keep people out. They keep boundaries in. Harold noticed the change that evening when he came home. He turned the key, once felt the clean resistance, and looked at me. "Feels different," he said. "It is." He didn't ask more. That was one of the gifts of long marriage, the luxury of shared understanding without questions. I dropped the old keys into a small paper bag, folded it, and placed it in the trash. For the first time in years, the house felt correctly measured, sealed at its edges. 30 years of intrusion ended with a click. 2 days later, on Sunday afternoon, I was trimming the rose bushes near the porch when I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. Denise's voice followed, bright and falsely casual. "Viv, it's me." She stood at the gate in a linen blouse, holding her purse like a prop sunglasses perched on her head. The sun caught the gold frames, turning them into a halo she didn't deserve. I straightened, slowly set down the shears, and wiped my hands on a towel. The distance between us felt smaller than it had in weeks, yet heavier. She smiled, that practiced half-tilt of her mouth that always came before a request. "Forgot my key," she said, laughing lightly. "Mind letting me in?" I stayed where I was, 5 feet from the door. "Keys have changed," I said. "Calls still work." The words hung there, simple, factual. She blinked, unsure if she had heard me right. "What do you mean?" Exactly what I said. Her laugh cracked, then sharp and defensive. "Oh, come on, Viv, don't be dramatic. It's me." I met her gaze through the screen door. That's precisely why I said. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of a lawnmower. A few houses down, Mrs. Green was watering her ferns, pretending not to look. Denise must have felt the eyes because her voice dropped softer now. "We need to talk. Not today. Maybe not here. I think you've done enough talking." She took a step closer to the porch, hands raised slightly, as if I were something to soothe. "Don't make this weird," she said. "You know Mom would hate this." The invocation of mother was her oldest trick, the last refuge of guilt. I let it slide past. The lock on the screen door gleamed between us. Some doors don't slam. They close quietly forever. I could see her starting to understand that this was not a phase, not a spat, but a boundary turned real. Her posture changed, shoulders, stiffening, smile thinning. "Fine," she said after a pause. "Be like that." She adjusted her sunglasses, pretending composure, and turned back toward the street. But I saw the tremor in her hand as she fished her phone from her bag, pretending to check messages. Across the fence, Mrs. Green nodded politely the way Southerners do when witnessing family decay. Denise's steps slowed as she reached her car, each one less confident than the last. She opened the door, hesitated as if expecting me to call her back. I didn't. The engine sputtered once, then steadied. She backed out too quickly, tires crunching on gravel. The smell of dust rose and lingered. I waited until she was gone before I exhaled. The roses beside me swayed slightly pink petals, trembling under the afternoon light. I went inside, locked the door, and listened to the sound of the deadbolt sliding home. It was clean, final, satisfying. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the street return to its usual rhythm. Harold came in from the den and asked, "Was that Denise?" "Yes." "Everything all right?" "Perfect." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You look lighter." "I am." That night after dinner, I took the new keys and placed one on his ring, one on mine, and the spare in the kitchen drawer under the spoons. I labeled them in blue ink, House, Peace. When I went to bed, I dreamt of doors, hundreds of them, closing softly, one after another, until the only sound left was the quiet of safety. The next morning, a small envelope sat in the mailbox. Inside was the copy of the church bulletin. On the back page, the new treasurer's name was printed, not hers. I pinned it to the corkboard beside my desk, another small marker of progress. The day stretched long and bright, unremarkable in the best way. I cleaned the porch, watered the herbs, folded laundry. Normalcy tasted new. In the evening, a text arrived from an unknown number. The message read, "You're really shutting me out." I typed a single response. The door was open for decades. Then I put my phone face down. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. I sat on the porch steps listening to the frogs along the creek. For the first time, I noticed how loud peace could be. It filled every corner of the night, steady and unapologetic. I locked the door before going inside, turned the bolt until it clicked, and whispered to myself, "That's the sound of enough." The following Sunday was bright with that false peace Charleston mornings like to offer before heat arrives. Harold and I drove to brunch at the Palmetto Room, the same place Denise once called our neutral ground. The hostess recognized us, led us to a quiet corner table, near the window where sunlight spilled across white linen and silverware that gleamed too much. The air smelled of butter and apology. I had chosen the table for its clarity. Boundaries deserve light. Denise arrived late as always, floating in on perfume and nerves, smiling too wide. Roger trailed behind her carrying a bouquet he clearly hadn't chosen. She waved like this was a family reunion, not an audit. I waited until they sat before reaching into my bag. The velvet pouch felt small but heavy in my hand. I placed it in the center of the table, untied the string, and let the bracelet spill out silver against white. The engraving caught the sunlight, Margaret's initials shining faintly. "This used to mean love," I said. "Now it means leverage. I'm returning it so it stops meaning anything." Her hand froze halfway to her water glass. Roger looked at her confused, then at me, unsure if this was a scene or a sermon. Harold sat beside me, calm, his fingers resting lightly on the table like punctuation. Denise blinked. "Viv, what are you doing?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at her and said, "You told me I'd understand someday. Maybe this is that day." The silence that followed was cleaner than forgiveness. Even the waiter paused near the kitchen door, pretending to check his pad while listening. Denise's face flushed pink, then pale. She reached for the bracelet, then pulled her hand back as if it burned. "You can't just return things like that," she said. I smiled. "You'd be surprised how simple returning can be once you stop confusing it with giving." She looked at Roger, hoping for rescue, but he was busy studying the condensation on his glass, realizing perhaps for the first time that charm has an expiration date. "You're making a scene," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm closing a ledger." I lifted my coffee cup and took a slow sip. Around us, forks clinked softly. Conversations resumed in low tones, the way people pretend not to notice history correcting itself. She wanted inheritance. I gave her a symbol. Roger cleared his throat. "Maybe we should just eat," he said. Harold finally spoke. "Good idea." He looked at Denise and added, "You've had quite an appetite for years." The waiter approached then, brave or oblivious. "Would you like to order?" he asked. Denise shook her head. I stood and placed a bill on the table for the coffee. "I'm finished." I looked down at the bracelet one last time, the reflection of light bending across its curve. It had belonged to a woman who believed appearances were virtues and silence was love. Now it was just metal. I turned to Harold. Ready. Always. As we walked toward the door, I heard Denise call my name. I paused, half turning. Her eyes were wet, but not with remorse. "Viv, please, can we talk privately?" I shook my head. Privacy was the soil where this sickness grew. Public air is healthier. She looked around, realizing everyone within 10 feet had gone quiet. The weight of attention pressed harder than guilt. I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear me clearly. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? Everyone looking." The bracelet glimmered between us. "Keep it. It fits your story better." Then I turned and left. Outside, the air smelled of salt and bread. Harold exhaled long and quiet. "You sure he asked?" "Yes. Returning what's yours isn't weakness. It's accounting." We walked to the car in silence. Behind us, the restaurant doors closed, muffling whatever aftermath she tried to perform. In the parking lot, I looked up at the church steeple visible down the street, white against blue sky. Sunday had always been her stage. Today it was mine. As we drove home, Harold reached over and squeezed my hand once. "That was precise," he said. "Precision is mercy." The city rolled by live oaks casting patterned shadows across the windshield. At home, I placed my purse on the counter and felt the faintest trace of relief. Not joy, exactly, but space. The kind that opens when a weight finally sets down. I brewed tea and stood by the window watching the neighbors return from their own brunches, hats, and pastel dresses, bobbing under the sun. Denise's car passed once, slowing near our house, then continued without stopping. I smiled. Later that afternoon, I went to my desk and opened the binder. Under Step 3, I wrote, "Symbolic restitution executed. Result equilibrium restored." Below it, I added, "Peace increases when ownership decreases." The act of writing steadied me. Numbers can measure loss, but they can also record freedom. I closed the binder, stacked it neatly beside the lamp, and turned on the radio. Some old jazz tune played, the kind we used to dance to when the world felt easier. Harold walked in 2 cups of tea in his hands. He handed me one and said, "You look younger." I laughed softly. Boundaries are better than Botox. We sat together on the couch, the sunlight warming our shoulders. He asked, "Do you think she'll come around?" I sipped my tea. She might circle, but she won't land. The silence that followed was the good kind, clean and unhurried. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentle, final. For years, that bracelet had been a link between us, proof of a bond neither of us wanted to name. Now it was gone, and the space it left was sacred. As the day faded into evening, I thought about my mother, about the way she had worn that bracelet at every occasion, its gleam a reminder that control can masquerade as care. I whispered to the empty room, "It's over, Margaret." The lessons learned. When the last light slipped away, I closed the curtains and felt the quiet settle deep. The silence didn't ache, it hummed. It was the sound of peace earning interest. By May, Charleston had turned humid and slow, the air heavy with the scent of wisteria and gossip. The story had done its rounds and settled like dust that never fully leaves furniture. Denise no longer came to church. Her name had disappeared from the newsletter, replaced by someone more dependable. Linda stopped defending her at brunch. Even Roger had retreated, attending services alone with a silence that spoke volumes. Reputation in this city didn't die suddenly. It faded piece by piece until no one remembered who started the story, only who ended up lonely. Denise's phone calls stopped after the first week. I assumed the silence meant surrender, but guilt has a way of circling back when it loses an audience. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw her car pull up in front of my house, silver, as ever the same vanity plate that once amused her friends. I was in the kitchen slicing lemons for iced tea, the irony almost comical. Through the curtain, I saw her climb out dressed too neatly for comfort, holding a covered tray wrapped in a check towel. She paused at the foot of the steps, took a deep breath, and smiled like a woman rehearsing remorse. I waited until the doorbell rang before I moved. Her voice came through the screen door, soft and sticky. "Viv, I made lemon bars. Thought we could talk." Her apology came too late, like a bill past due. I stepped closer, close enough for her to see my outline through the glass, but not enough to open the door. The tray wobbled in her hands. "Locks aren't for anger, Denise. They're for peace." Her smile faltered, then reassembled itself. "You won't even forgive me. Forgiveness is free. Access isn't." Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment I thought she might cry, but Denise had never been good at sincerity unless it served her. She looked around, realizing the neighbors could see. Across the street, Mrs. Green's curtains shifted. Denise lowered her voice. "Please, Viv, I've lost everyone. I've been humiliated enough. Let's not make this worse." I met her gaze through the glass, calm and steady. "You're the one who thought humiliation was a party trick. Now you're just cleaning up after yourself." She blinked fast, the way she used to when scolded as a child. "I didn't mean for things to go so far," she said. "It just happened." I wanted to laugh. Theft never just happens. It's always a choice made with clean hands. I said nothing. She stepped closer, setting the tray down on the porch railing, as if peace could be exchanged for baked goods. "You can't rebuild trust with lemon bars." She looked down at the tray, then back at me, her voice trembling. I'm trying, Viv. You're my sister. That used to mean something. It still does, I said quietly. It means history, not obligation. The wind moved between us, lifting a corner of the towel covering the dessert. The smell of sugar and citrus filled the air, too sweet, almost desperate. Denise's shoulders slumped. You've changed. I smiled faintly. Finally. She waited, but I didn't move. Eventually, she reached for the tray again, hesitating. Take them, she said. At least that. No, I said. Keep them. You'll need something to carry when you walk away. Her eyes narrowed. You think this makes you righteous? I think it makes me peaceful. She took a shaky breath, her composure fraying. People talk, you know. They say you went too far. I shrugged. People need hobbies. Denise's lips tightened, anger flaring where shame had been. You always think you're better. You always did. That's why Mother loved me more. Maybe she did, I said. But love without respect is just noise. Her face twisted, confusion and resentment mixing like oil and water. I stepped back, my hand on the doorknob. Goodbye, Denise. She blinked. That's it. For now. Then I closed the door gently. Not a slam, not a statement. Just the soft, final sound of a chapter sealing itself. Outside, I heard her exhale sharply, then footsteps descending the porch steps. Through the window, I watched her walk to the car, the tray still in her hands. She stood there for a moment, looking up at the sky as if asking for witnesses, then opened the car door and slid inside. The engine turned over. She sat there without moving for nearly a minute before driving off. When she was gone, I opened the door, letting the afternoon air in. The porch smelled faintly of lemon and regret. On the railing where she had set the tray, a small smear of powdered sugar caught the light. I brushed it away with a napkin. Inside, the clock struck 4. Harold entered from the den, raising an eyebrow. Visitor. Denise. He nodded slowly. Did she apologize? In her language, yes. Did you answer? In mine. He smiled a little, not quite proud, not quite sad. Then he asked, You feel better? Better isn't the word. Lighter, maybe. We sat in the kitchen with our tea, the ice melting slowly. Outside, the sun was lowering, slanting through the blinds in gold stripes. I thought about how peace never announces itself. It just settles quiet and unbothered. Later that evening, as the sky darkened, I checked my phone. One new message from an unknown number. It read, I really did make those myself. I deleted it without opening. Some debts don't need collectors. Just silence. Over the next week, I heard pieces of Denise's story drifting through the city. Someone said she was moving away to stay with a cousin in Savannah. Someone else claimed she was joining a Bible study group. None of it mattered. Consequence doesn't need location. It needs memory. Every town holds its own record. Charleston's is especially thorough. The following Sunday, Pastor Cole mentioned forgiveness during his sermon, his eyes glancing toward me only once. I smiled politely. Forgiveness had already been granted. It just came with locked doors. After the service, Mrs. Harris squeezed my hand and said, You did right. I nodded, not because I needed affirmation, but because peace thrives quietly on small acknowledgments. That evening, as Harold read in his chair, I sat at my desk and opened the binder again. Under step 4, I wrote, Audacity returned and declined. Result silence maintained. Then beneath that, a final line. Access is a privilege, not a right. I closed the binder and looked toward the window. Outside, the night air was heavy but calm. The city hummed in the distance, unconcerned. I turned off the lamp and whispered, Some doors are better left locked. June 10th, 2024. The morning light came soft and square through the blinds, slicing the kitchen into calm geometry. Charleston's air was already warm, the kind that made tea steam before it even steeped. I measured the leaves with the same precision I once used to balance accounts, 1 scoop for clarity, 1 for closure. On the table lay the old leather ledger I had kept since 1989, its corners rounded from use, its pages yellowed but orderly. I opened it to the last section marked personal. A category I had never allowed to mingle with business. My handwriting was steady, deliberate. Under the final line, I wrote $112,000, peace restored. The ink spread slightly on the paper like a sigh. Harold entered in his robe, holding the morning paper, the sound of its fold a familiar comfort. "Do you miss her?" he asked. I didn't look up. I missed the version of her that didn't smile while stealing. He nodded, poured himself coffee, said nothing more. Silence had become our shared fluency. After breakfast, I walked to the small desk by the window and took out my checkbook. The numbers came easily, like muscle memory returning to form. Pay to the order of Denise Carter Wells. Amount $100. Memo refund for emotional labor. Closure costs exactly $100. I signed it, neatly tore the check free, and slipped it into an envelope. On the back, I wrote her address by hand. The act felt ceremonial, not bitter. Justice can be cold without cruelty. I sealed it, affixed a stamp, and set it by the door for Harold to mail. She wanted my money. I gave her a moral invoice. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. I watered the basil, folded laundry, dusted the shelf where my mother's photograph still sat. Margaret smiled from another lifetime pearls, bright against her neck. I stared at her a long moment. "You raised 2 daughters on fairness and appearances," I whispered. "One learned to keep ledgers, the other learned to spend them." Outside, cicadas hummed. I made another cup of tea and sat by the window where the breeze pushed faintly through the screen. The check waited on the counter like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. Around noon, Harold left for the post office. When he returned, he said simply, "It's gone." "Good," I replied. "Some balances need witnesses." Later that afternoon, the mail carrier delivered a small stack of envelopes, mostly bills and newsletters. I noticed one addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. It was from Pastor Cole, a thank you note for last month's anonymous donation to the church roof fund. Inside was a line that read, "True peace is the quiet that follows a settled account." I smiled. Providence sometimes has a sense of humor. As evening fell, the light shifted golden over the porch, filtering through the hydrangeas that Denise had once helped me plant. They had bloomed stronger this year, defiantly healthy. Harold sat beside me reading. After a while, he said, "Do you think she'll cash it?" "Probably. Closure spends like any other currency." He chuckled softly. "And if she doesn't, then peace doubles in value." The street was still save for a child's bicycle rolling somewhere beyond the corner. I looked at our front door, the brass lock catching the light. Peace doesn't need applause, just a lock that works. The ledger still lay open inside, and from where I sat, I could see the neat line of ink across its page. The entry felt final, balanced not in dollars, but in meaning. I had spent years believing peace required understanding. Now I knew it only needed boundaries. After dinner, I gathered the used teacups, rinsed them, and wiped the counter until it shone. Small rituals had become my form of prayer. When the dishes were done, I opened the back door and stepped into the yard. Fireflies had begun their quiet performance, blinking across the grass in patient rhythm. I thought about Denise somewhere across town, maybe opening the envelope, maybe laughing, maybe crying, maybe nothing at all. It didn't matter. The ledger had closed. That was the only arithmetic that counted. At 9 o'clock, I sat at my desk once more and added a final note beneath the balance. Lessons learned interest accrued. I signed my initials VC and closed the cover. The sound of it shutting was soft but complete. Harold came to the doorway, writing again. "Accounting," I said. He nodded. "You've always been good at that." I smiled faintly. I had to be. Someone had to keep the family solvent in truth, if not in affection. He came closer, kissed the top of my head, and turned off the desk lamp. "Leave it dark," I said. "The day's already balanced." We moved to the porch again, the night warm but forgiving. From somewhere down the block came the faint sound of laughter, unburdened and ordinary. For once I didn't envy it. I had my own version now, quieter but enduring. The kind earned, not granted. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the air wrap around me like closure itself had texture. The smell of lemon still lingered faintly in the air from last month's encounter, sweet but hollow. Every story leaves residue. This one at least smelled clean. When we finally went inside, I locked the door, turned the deadbolt once, twice, and whispered to no one in particular. That's enough. Upstairs, the clock ticked steady, the rhythm of a house that no longer waited for apologies. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages, just quiet. I deleted Denise's contact and emptied the trash folder. Gone. For good this time. I slipped under the sheets, the cotton cool against my skin, and listened to Harold breathing beside me. Outside, Charleston's night air pressed close against the windows, dense and still. I let my eyes close and saw numbers fade into light ledgers, turning into blank pages. Peace finally unrecorded. The next morning would bring nothing dramatic, and that was the point. Closure isn't cinematic. It's domestic. It's the sound of birds too early and tea too hot and doors that stay locked not from fear, but from choice. If someone in your family ever smiled while taking what's yours, tell me your story below. You're not alone.